Next thing we're going to talk about today happens to be insulation. Now, it doesn't matter the version, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, batting, blown-in, blue jean, cellulose, rock wool, spray foam, all of those different versions of insulation, according to them, unfortunately only stops radiant heat gain or loss by 10%. Now, if you were taking a quiz in school and you only got 10%, what type of grade would that be? Naturally, you would be failing. And this is what we're putting in our homes every single day. New builds, retrofits, old homes, you name it. We all use batting, blown-in, blue jean, cellulose, rock wool, spray foam, any of those different versions. They also work off of what is called an R value. Now, the real question is, what does that R actually stand for? We always hear it followed by a number. R19, R38, R40, R60. What that R stands for is it actually stands for resistance. So the depth of that insulation is the amount of heat transfer that it can resist. Now, the problem that we run into is over time, that light and fluffy stuff they blow into your attic doesn't stay light and fluffy forever. It compresses, it settles, it compacts, and when it does that, heat transfers through it fast. I like to use the example here of a rainstorm. If I walk outside in a rainstorm and I don't want to get wet, or you guys don't want to get wet, what good would it do if I handed you a quilt? Now let's play devil's advocate for a minute. So for a time being with a quilt, no matter how thick or thin it was, it wouldn't get us wet. But over time, we'd be standing out in the rain and we'd be getting wet. Now if we were to walk outside in a rainstorm and I didn't want you to get wet, naturally I would hand you an umbrella. An umbrella is going to keep that water off of you and make sure that you don't get wet. Now we're going to talk about the umbrella here in a little bit, but I want you to keep that in mind as we talk about insulation. The problem that causes, this causes a higher cooling bill in the summer because that heat is radiating into your living space through your attic when that insulation becomes depleted. Traditional insulation companies, manufacturers of that, say you should be reapplying it roughly every 7 to 9 years. Unfortunately, attics tend to be a place that's out of sight, out of mind. Can't tell you how often homeowners, and it's been 20 years, it's been 40 years, it's been 50 years since they insulated that attic. That causes a higher cooling bill in the summer because the heat's coming through into your living space. In the winter, this also causes a higher heating bill. Naturally, you're trying to keep your house warm, and when you're doing that, but it's not slowing down that heat transfer out into the attic and you're losing it, naturally it's going to cause a higher heating bill. Your furnace is going to run more, it's going to have more wear and tear, it's going to wear out quicker, and in turn your bill is going to go up. The question I like to pose is, do you want to resist that heat transfer, aka that quilt in a rainstorm, or do you want to stop it like that umbrella? I would assume most of you would think that you would rather stop it rather than just slow it down. Now, as we talk about attics in particular, unfortunately, we find all random things inside of attics. On the left-hand side, this was insulation from 1956. It was actually ground up wood chips. That is a fire hazard. I do not recommend doing that. On the right-hand side here, if any of you want to take a second and guess what this is, unfortunately, it's a dryer vent. You can imagine every time turning on your dryer, pumping hot, humid air into that attic, it's going to cause growth. You're also going to get a bunch of lint in there, which is naturally an accelerant and a fire hazard. We don't recommend that either. Other random things that we find, leaks, holes. That one on the left-hand side was huge. And unfortunately, mildew and mold. Now people tell me, TJ, we live in a desert, we don't get mold. Unfortunately, yes, we do. That attic is a very prone space to growth and those type of things. It can affect our health, it can affect the structure of our home, all sorts of things. Now, how do we get to the, how do we stop the heat transfer rather than slow it down? It was actually a product developed by the space program and NASA to protect our astronauts in space. What they found was if they used traditional insulation, batting, blown-in, blue jean, cellulose, rock wool, all those different versions like we talked about, if they used that and it only stopped 10% of that heat transfer, unfortunately, what would happen to our astronauts if they would have either fried and froze or froze and then fried? Now, what I'm going to show you is a video from the History Channel. Some of you are familiar with the History Channel, that talks about how they protected those astronauts in space. Now, there's two questions that we're going to pose at the end of this video. Number one, what was the solution they came up with? And number two, what did it do? So I want you to pay attention to this video real quick.
Insulation is helping us go places we could never go before, including extreme environments. When designing insulation for the International Space Station, scientists were confronted with a set of problems found nowhere on Earth.
We don't have the benefit of Earth's atmosphere when we're in orbit. And not having that benefit, we're exposed to much more extreme environments. In the same orbit, we can see temperatures in excess of 250 degrees Fahrenheit while we're in the sun, while a few minutes later be exposed to conditions that produce environments less than minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And we go through this 16 times a day, every day, 365 days a year.
Scientists had to rethink the entire insulation process when designing the station. The vacuum of space allows only for radiant heat transfer, usually in the form of energy waves emanating from the sun. Earth's atmosphere prevents it from being overheated by these waves. But the space station, without such protection, is subject to the extreme temperatures brought on by solar radiation. The scientists had to come up with an insulation that would safeguard it. Their solution was a multi-layer insulation, or MLI.
MLI serves two purposes. The first is to reject or reflect a lot of the sun's energy, and the second is to entrap heat that's generated internally. And by doing this, we can moderate the extremes that we see on orbit.
One of the key components of the insulation is the plastic.
On that plastic, we apply thin layers of aluminum, and that aluminum is very reflective.
The mylar is protected by an outer layer of fiberglass fabric. This layer strengthens the insulation blanket. The inner side is aluminized to prevent harmful radiation like ultraviolet light. All the layers are sewn together to create a pillow-like blanket just 1/4 of an inch thick. When designing the insulation, scientists also had to make sure it didn't weigh too much.
We use very thin layers to make up multi-layer insulation. And the reason mainly is because of weight. The pressure shell of the module itself is about 1/4 inch thick on some of these modules, and that aluminum can be very heavy. Well, the last thing you want to do is add more weight to the space station.
Working in tandem with thermal controls inside the station, this advanced insulation helps to maintain a stable onboard environment. With a temperature of 65 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity in the range of 25 to 70%. This is the future of insulation.
So as you watch that video, the first question that I posed was, what was their solution? Their solution was a product called multi-layer insulation. The second question that I posed to you is, what does it accomplish? And the thing that it accomplishes is it keeps whatever's outside out and whatever's inside in. So as we look at that scenario, multi-layer insulation's job is to stop radiant heat from entering your home, and number two, stop radiant heat from leaving your home. AKA in the summer, we don't want it coming in, and in the winter, we don't want it leaving. Now as we look at that, multi-layer is made out of 5 layers. 2 layers, top and bottom, are made out of 99% aluminum alloy. The reason we use aluminum is because in science we found that 99.9% aluminum stops 97% of radiant heat transfer. This is the umbrella in that analogy that I gave you earlier, the quilt versus the umbrella. Now when we use 99% aluminum, as we stop that heat transfer, whatever's inside your house stays in, whatever's outside your house stays out. It's also the last time you would ever have to insulate your house ever again. So as we look at that, with blown in, we're supposed to do it roughly every 7 to 9 years, over and over and over again. I consider that of insanity. Obviously, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Well, when we use multi-layer, we stop that heat transfer once and we're done. It's the last time you ever have to insulate your house ever again. Now the core inside of here, this little yellow core on the right-hand side, you see the black core that's actually in black. Its job is to use a wicking material and be an insulating core as well. Its job is to make sure that those 2 layers are separated so that the top layer can be hot and the bottom layer can be cold, or vice versa. The top layer can be cold and the bottom layer can be warm. Now, as we continue on, it also passes what is called a 5-room corner wall fire test. Scientifically speaking, what that means is they take a layer of this, they put it in a wall, corner of a wall, they light a fire at the base of that wall. If it takes longer for an hour for that product to actually catch fire and burn, it passes that test. So it also acts as a fire retardant inside of your ceiling as well to slow down any fires that you may have inside of your home. Now the core that's inside of there, that little black tiny core that's probably only about a 1/4 of an inch thick, according to the John Manville Technical Center, has the R value of an average combined R value of an R15. In layman's terms, what that means is that's the equivalent of 4 inches of traditional blown-in insulation, even though it's only roughly a 1/4 of an inch thick. But we don't necessarily care too much about that quilt analogy or the quilt part of it. We care about the emissivity value or its reflective capability, which is naturally 97%. So if you took a quiz in school and before you got 10% on it, you clearly failed, but then you take the same quiz and you get 97% on it, naturally that's A. So we take your attic from an F to an A when it comes to that. As we can see here, this is what happens in summer. Obviously, radiant heat radiates your attic, creating that superheated air, and then it tries to permeate into your living space. Multi-layer's job, as you can see, is going to stop it up to 97%, making your home more comfortable, reducing your energy costs, and in turn, saving you money. In the wintertime, what we look at is we want to keep the warm air in and the cold air out. Multi-layer is going to retain that heat by 75%, keeping that heat in your home, reducing the runtime of your furnace, and keeping your home more comfortable. Naturally reducing those costs, and in turn, once again, saving you money. Now, as we look at other things that we need to do and before and after photos with multi-layer insulation. As we look at before and after photos of multi-layer insulation. In the summertime, stopping it from 97% in terms of gaining and 75% retention in the winter from leaving. So you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, here's some blown-in insulation. Multi-layer has been applied to it. Once again, some before and afters of a home in terms of blown-in insulation and then multi-layer being put over the top of it. It also ends up making the attic look fairly clean. As you can see here, it almost turns into a giant mirror. I like to call it wall-to-wall aluminum carpet inside of your attic. Now what this means for you as a homeowner. Number one, cutting those heating and cooling bills immediately, saving you money on those utilities. Number two, save wear and tear on that equipment. If we can reduce the runtime, naturally they'll last longer. Number three, help eliminate those hot and cold spots in your home. Naturally, we want those temperatures to be balanced, and multi-layer does that. Create a comfortable, more comfortable environment, help preserve the environment, increase the resale value of your home, decrease our dependence on that foreign energy, and last but not least, improve the overall comfort of your home. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about after these reviews is attic ventilation. But Energy Star, adding additional to traditional insulation, multi-layer reflective insulation saves energy both in the summer and winter by redirecting radiant heat in your home. Multi-layer insulation can help your home become Energy Star approved as well, adding value. Texas A&M also did an independent study on this. They said adding reflective insulation to an R19 proved more effective than upgrading that insulation to an R30. They also mentioned that adding reflective insulation showed a faster payback than doing traditional insulation. Naturally, either way there's a cost there, but you're going to get a faster payback when you use a product like multi-layer insulation.